Mathias Joseph Alten has been called Grand Rapids' best-known artist, the Dean of Michigan painters, one of the most respected of Michigan artists, and even a leading American painter, as artists in any field are uniquely privileged to do. Alten left a particularly rich record of his personal journey through life. This legacy exists in the form of self-portraits and photographs, in print, and in the astoundingly prolific output of paintings covering a broad swath of the aspects of the world in which he lived.
What he could do, of course, would be to record the life and surrounding and people of really a single city or a single area in a single state, i.e. Grand Rapids in Michigan.
Alten's geographical and professional journeys as an American painter were extensive, taking him to both coasts of the United States, when railways were the primary means of long-distance land travel, and to the coasts of the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico. He also crisscrossed the Atlantic Ocean a half-dozen times when steamships dominated sea travel. In contrast, his professional development was steady and straightforward, with only brief and subtle forays into experimentation. In what proved to be his finishing school, Alten spent about a year in Paris, late 1898 through 1899, attending what might be called practical but prestigious art schools, the Académie Gilleo being the primary one. Through it all, for some 25 years, he conducted classes in drawing and painting. The first decade of the 1900s brought rapid acceptance of Alten's paintings and his portraiture skills, enabling him to have an impressive home built on the northeast corner of Hope Street and Fuller Avenue, a new area of elegant homes along Lake Drive. As was the tradition of artists of that time, Alten took great pride in craftsmanship apart from his painting.
Alten was quoted in a newspaper interview from 1913. He said that he had spent the winter not only painting but carving and gilding frames. And up till now, we had not really seen any frame that seems to have been made in the style that an artist might have made a frame until this frame appeared on the scene.
He lavished his decorative skills on the Hope Street home, designing stained glass windows and creating ceiling mosaics for the reception hall, as well as a mural and a floor with his brass initials set in marble for the vestibule. Despite all the pride and hard work invested in this first house, within 10 years the decision was made to purchase the 40-acre Stacy farm and house farther out on East Fulton Street. The property was across from what were then the pastures of the Low Estate, now Aquinas College. This move placed Alten within easy walking or Model T driving distance of many paintable rural scenes. Besides, the streetcar line had been laid to just that point, providing easy access to downtown, where his successive studios were located. There had been serious plans for a move to New York in order to be closer to art centers, but these had been cast aside. This was to be Alten's home and later the location of his studio for the remainder of his life. This home, too, benefited from Alten's skills and artistic flair. The living room was graced by a handsome limestone mantel with his carved decoration. Various favorite paintings were hung over it. Alten also painted a border in the style of the room's oriental carpet around the edges of the ceiling. In the living room and elsewhere, Alten hand-rubbed the finish for the woodwork, and in the dining room used molding to create panel effects on the walls. The Altens' 3 daughters grew to young womanhood here and are featured in some of Alten's better-known work. One such piece is of the sisters posed in front of a carved and gilded Japanese-style screen, which Alten painted. This screen also appears in formal family photos of an earlier period. The barn and original farmhouse of the old Stacy farm were torn down, but not before serving as subjects for Alten's paintings. Mrs. Alten created a variety of garden beds in the large side lot and to the front and east side of the house. Traces of these remain, along with a few venerable trees which now tower over the house.
She had a great flower garden apparently around the house. In fact, was well known for the different flowers that she did grow. The story goes that he borrowed an urn in order to put the lotus blossoms in because they were such a large flower, and put them in, but decided at the end that maybe this dulled color of the vase was not perfect for his composition, so took them out, painted a cobalt blue, stuck them back in, and continued to paint the painting.
Alt and Anita, who lived in the old house with their grandfather, went out in the yard and picked flowers. This day they came in with their hands full of flowers, put them down in front of their grandfather, and said, "Here, Grandpa, paint these."
Combining family life with the need to develop a clientele now that his major early patrons had left Michigan or passed on, not to mention his demanding rate of output, must have been extremely challenging for Alten. And while Mrs. Alten accompanied him on some of his less rigorous travels, more and more in later years, he was said to prefer a quiet life at this home in Grand Rapids.
When Father would go on trips, he'd usually bring a beautiful hat, especially if he was around Paris, but from other places. And often he would paint Mother's portrait in a hat. Mother was always very supportive of my father. She did everything she could to make the trips possible.
He would take us to school. And he was a very unique person. If you looked at him, you'd look twice. And he was kind of fun, I thought, because he was so different than the ordinary person.
1929 was a notable year for Mathias Alten, Midwestern artist. Early in the year, a gallery in New York City presented a one-man show of his work to favorable reviews. A trip to New York in February for the opening was followed by a working vacation in Florida for the couple. In the fall, another trip to Southern California centered around Laguna Beach. Meanwhile, a well-known national magazine of the time chose one of Alten's Spanish paintings for its cover, with a full-page article inside. That same month, October 1929, will be recognized as the date of the notorious crash of 1929. With the onset of the Great Depression, Alten decided to close his last downtown studio, located in the Peck Building on the northwest corner of Division and Monroe. And with some remodeling, he transformed the family's den into a home studio. This was where his last self-portrait, Myself at 66, was painted. The background includes a glimpse of Alten's more recent paintings displayed in floor-to-ceiling salon style. Alten's arrival at this point in his life was the culmination of many journeys. His parents, with their 2 sons and one of 2 daughters, emigrated in 1889 from the westernmost edge of today's Germany, an area between the Saar River in the south and the Mosel River in the north. His mother, Maria Kilberg, had been born to a family of wine merchants. His father, Michael Alten, was a schoolmaster and therefore a government official. He enjoyed a prestigious position in the various small towns to which he was assigned. The younger Alten was born in Gusenberg in 1871. His father had charge of the school there. The schoolmaster's home was a comparatively handsome 2-story red brick crowded up against the more utilitarian farmers' homes across the way. The family later moved to Marpingen, just south of Sankt Wendel, a principal town in the region. Here, Alten served his apprenticeship to a muralist from 1885 to 1888. The Saar area had been incorporated into the new German Empire the year of Alten's birth. Family tradition says there was fear the military draft would take the Altens' talented but none too robust son. This led his parents to emigrate to western Michigan, near an Alten relative and her large family. Perhaps they chose the area because its climate and landscape were not radically different from that of their northwestern corner of Europe. Once the family had settled in Grand Rapids, the calls on young Alten's skills as a painter of signs, scenery for theaters, and murals were many. Soon he felt ready to marry. Bertha Schwind Alten was a descendant of German craftsmen from Central Europe who had emigrated in the mid-19th century to work in the rising Grand Rapids furniture industry. After their marriage, the couple, with the help of Bertha's mother, Teresa Schwind, operated Schwind and Alten, a paint and wallpaper store begun by Bertha's father. In 1898, 10 years after leaving Europe for the United States, Alten obtained U.S. citizenship. With his earnings from the sale of his paintings at state fairs and the support of wealthy patrons, Alten was able to sail for France and the famed Paris art schools of the Belle Epoque, a lifelong dream.
When I was about 11 years old, took the whole family to Europe. Father would go to all the little towns out of The Hague to paint. During the summertime, we lived in Scheveningen on the North Sea. Father went there to paint the big horses that haul in the fishing boats. There's no harbor, and they would pull the boats up on the beach.
The question, why would Mathias Alten want to visit Europe and the Netherlands, is of historic significance. Knowing the answer will allow us to appreciate the broad range of his continuous training. His initial European training was concentrated on the skills of representing the world in words and images. As an artist, he wanted to enrich his understanding, and he followed many of the American artists to Europe to complete their study. Paris was already somewhat of a center, which explains why he went there first. The international art world, as well as the international market, however, was dominated by the Dutch painters active in the city of The Hague. Something happens to the atmosphere above this waterlogged land, divided by rivers, ditches, canals, lakes, and ponds. Pregnant rain clouds hang above the land forever, doing battle with an evasive sun, creating a unique gray water wonderland. Tonal harmony was the artist's major concern in the Netherlands. I believe that Mathias Alten was confirmed in his own exploration of nature by these Dutch artists of the Hague School. Both in subject and in his approach, he reflects the works of such masters as Jacob Maris and Anton Mauve. Jacob Maris, Waiting on Shore, is but one example where the subject matter is the seashore and the real subject is the light. When we compare this with the paintings of the Broken Mast, we are struck by the similarity. Mathias was a very astute student. He was able to digest what he saw and follow new roads with great success. The spontaneous sketch by Willem Roelof is another direct study of nature which would have appealed to Alten. The human form was celebrated with vigor and youth by such painters as Joseph Israels, as we can see here with his work of his children at the seashore. What we need to recognize, however, is that by the time Mathias Alten went to The Hague and Scheveningen, many of the major figures were gone. Mathias Alten worked hard in the Netherlands and produced many unique works. Dutch scenes shown the welcome of the fishermen to return home safely after days at sea catching fish. The other work is an early work by Vincent van Gogh. It is thickly painted, and the waves are almost sculpted on top of the canvas. Alten was a modernist in his sense of color and composition. When we think of the Hague School, we must also recognize that it was a modern school in their day. Here is a windmill done in 1905 by Piet Mondrian, and here is a windmill by Mathias Alten, done in 1910-1911. Alten returns and enriches the life of the people in Grand Rapids. The quiet dignity that speaks from his last work is indicative of what he will do in the future. He shares with the Dutch masters of the 19th century his attitude towards painting, his attitude towards work and nature. So it is more than color, more than technique, more than a compositional element, more than a subject matter. It is the very content of his work that connects his with the Dutch masters. We in Grand Rapids have been richly blessed by this painter from Germany.
So there was this interest in capturing essence of maybe early morning, of scenes just before twilight, His idea was you would introduce a small amount of alizarin crimson, which was a dark, transparent red pigment, into each of the colors to kind of create a harmonious landscape, because that color would be introduced into each color in the painting.
The question of how a painting gets started is always an interesting one, and in the case of Mathias Alten, I have some wonderful examples here. In this case here, we have a small panel painting, and we can still see the original pencil lines that he used to outline the basic shapes of the painting before he began the process. We can then see that he filled in those spaces, and the left drawing lines still there for us to see. So they're an integral part. Here, this is a small painting on canvas that I can hold up. It's done in Valencia, studied directly from the subject matter itself. And in this case, especially in the wagon wheels, which are very complex in this area here, we can still see some of the pencil drawing lines underneath as well. Of course, the fascinating thing to me is that his painting is very much like his drawing. And so drawing is at the basis of many of his works.
Alten had already begun exhibiting widely in Michigan before he left, and upon his return, the pace and range of venues picked up rapidly, notably Chicago, Philadelphia, occasionally in New York City, and on the West Coast. It was while in New York that Alten saw an exhibit of the Spanish painter Sorolla and was inspired to travel to Spain.
The real change in his career came with his trip to Spain, his initial trip to Spain in 1912. Then suddenly we also see some paintings in which he is applying pigment more straight out of the tube directly onto a white ground canvas, which certainly would be much more of the French Impressionist approach to painting. And therefore you're going to get certainly much cleaner, much brighter colors, because they are not tinted down or whitened down with any other color, so you're looking at really a great deal more of chroma to the pigment itself.
Mural work continued through his early career in both private homes and public buildings. Inaccessibility to the former and change of use of many of the latter have resulted in Alten's murals being less known. However, the fact that they were usually done on canvas mounted on walls has made it possible to rescue some. Alten worked in watercolors much more frequently in the early than in the later years, particularly when traveling. The technique and quality of his more finished watercolors are very similar to those of his paintings in oils. As an adjunct to his paintings of all types, Alten continued pencil sketching throughout his career. The demand for portraits by Alten seems to have peaked in the 1920s, as his eldest daughter took on the job of seeking out portrait commissions. Meanwhile, he continued his impressive output of paintings featuring an unusually wide range of subjects.
As an artist in the state of Michigan, there was no artist during his time period that really lived in the state and continued to paint the state and record the state in as many varied ways as Alten did.
Alten completed Birches in Winter the year before his death. All of his artistic skills were obviously still intact, a fact in which he took great pride. A few months later, Mathias Joseph Alten put down palette and brushes for a final time.